Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Finding Islam podcast. My name is Abeer. I'm your host and lifestyle editor for Finding Islam. I'm joined with three very, very special and talented and intelligent brothers, mashallah, with Abdullah, Muhammad, and Ibrahim. And we're just going to have a chat, about arts and humanities and kind of the different degree choices that I suppose are not typically encouraged as much as like typical STEM fields are, particularly amongst the Muslim communities. So, without further ado, we'll kick it off. So, first of all, how are y'all? How's everyone's doing? How are y'all keeping? I know for some of you it was a busy period with exams and stuff as well. So are all your exams stuff finished now?
I've got one deadline, alhamdulillah, but I think everybody else is done, aren't they?
Alhamdulillah, I've been done for I've been done for like 2 weeks, but I've got end of next week I need to submit the proposal for my dissertation. So now everything's starting to move a bit quickly. Alhamdulillah, it's not as intense as the last semester has been.
Yeah. Good stuff. So now, I suppose to give the people some background, I took a very traditional career route. I studied chemical engineering, like a good Pakistani boy, and I work as an engineer now. And I suppose Abdullah, we'll start with yourself because you study architecture. You study architecture, and I find that interesting because I suppose architecture is kind of an interesting one because it's not strictly an arts degree. It's you still have some kind of, I suppose, engineering principles, mathematical principles. You probably imagine that's part of your degree, but at the same time, it does involve a lot of kind of artistic flair as well. Just by the nature of what you're trying to do and create kind of special buildings, as well as you have the historical aspect. So kind of it covers a lot of things within that field. Like, would you have found that yourself studying architecture?
Yeah, it's one of those one of the questions that you can never quite do justice to, because I think to get so pompous, like, was it 1 minute in? But I think that the language and the tools and the labels that we're using, things like architecture don't work in those. For example, perhaps a parallel is Arabic grammar. Arabic grammar starts being developed after the Quran, right? And the Quran forms the basis for all these rules that come in, all these kind of frameworks. But the Quran itself doesn't fit those rules, and in moments you have exceptions, right? Because it predates the framework. And so perhaps we have kind of a secular way of looking at education, in which really, no subjects work really. If you drill deep and think about them too much, they don't really make sense in their labels. But architecture is evidently that, and it kind of exploits that the most, where it shows that it's not an art, it's not a science, it's neither, and it's not that it's both. It's literally neither, right? And yeah, it's a strange one, subhanAllah. I guess I don't want to waffle, but it's something I don't know, because I don't think that you can define it in those terms.
Yeah, it kind of highlights the issue of the whole STEM moniker as well. Like, I know even now rather than STEM, they use STEAM to include arts as well. So you have science, technology, engineering, arts, maths, which I think actually makes a lot of sense, because obviously it's fun to make fun of art students and arts degrees and all these things. And feels
I can do both.
Yeah, you can do. You're constantly flipping over on each side.
Whenever it's convenient, bro.
Yeah. But yeah, like the reality is, you don't. On an individual basis as well, I think you don't want to just be fully kind of fully deep into one skill set. Like, it's even like in engineering, we learn a lot of communication skills. We do a lot of presentations and things. We even learn, like, we cover areas such as like ethics and kind of morals, which I actually think is very important to learn in general, regardless of your field. And when we look at our kind of very capitalist society we live in, morality is often kind of pushed to the side in the name of innovation and consumerism and many other things. So I think it makes sense that having strict labels like that, it doesn't really fit. It's especially for subjects like architecture. Now, for like yourselves, Muhammad and Ibrahim, your fields are, I suppose, a bit more traditional in the arts kind of way. Particularly, I suppose, Muhammad, because you kind of you study like history and stuff. And did you went
Yeah.
like? Is it fair to say you went in that direction because like that was just what you had interest in?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a no-brainer that I would go into histories. I was always into history. I was like reading encyclopedias as a child and always very interested in like the historical background and just learning about different places and things. And it was a kind of cart before the horse kind of decision for me, in the sense of like I'm going to study history and then figure out what I'm going to do with it later. But it was always kind of geared towards education. The only question was where. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up in history.
Mo's the kind of in our group who's the Finding Islam contributors chat. Everybody is wary to say anything historical, just in case, because they'll see Mo furiously typing. Actually,
no,
that we appreciate it a lot. I've been
I can
corrected many a time by
hear
him.
Marty, like pushing his glasses up as he's about to type.
Yeah, he's feeling cracking his knuckles, just getting ready to refute some people in the chat. But, no, that's I think that's
image
actually.
I have.
I think that's cool that you went into a field that like you actually like you have a genuine interest ever since you were young. Because to be honest, that's not true for everyone. Like I knew for me, I was interested in science and technology and all this stuff, but like I didn't specifically know as a child I want to become a chemical engineer. And even that's like you study chemical engineering, but like what you end up working as, there's so many different fields and types of engineer as well outside of that. But And Ibrahim, I'm guessing you chose to study English because you wanted to learn English.
That never gets old, does it? So for me, the decision was I kind of took the long way around to get to something I already kind of knew. For a lot of my like secondary school years, I had this assumption that I was going to go down an engineering route. Like for a while, like up until I was around 15, 16ish, I just thought I was going to end up doing like aeronautical engineering. I had like a vague idea about it, but I kind of got. I think towards the end of secondary school, like the last 2 years, I was getting grips, coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't really that into the subject. There were aspects I liked of the sciences, of the natural sciences. Most of those had very little to do with mechanics and things like that, but more to do with things like the side of like the natural sciences that pretty much no one deems as like practical, like astronomy and things like that. And I think a number of things impacted the decision I made. Because I've always been like a sort of geek for storytelling and whatnot, so that was why English should have been a no-brainer for a long time. One of the moments I think really impacted me was actually my physics teacher, and because what I've come to realize is that physicists, for as much as we think of like it, because we have this sort of stereotype that STEM is this entirely utilitarian field, right? It's for people who are practical about everything. But I've come to realize physicists are very impractical people. They're very romantic people, in fact. I'd posit that anyway. From the students I met, most of the students I've met who'd studied physics were not interested in what they were going to do after uni. They were just interested in what they were doing now. And my physics teacher had said something along the lines, when we were starting our A-levels, he said to our class that a lot of you guys will claim that you love science. I'm going to tell you now, you don't love science. You've got a crush on science. And that was like a moment of realization for me, because there were parts of physics that I dreaded seeing on the exam paper. And like I still have like PTSD about the about the subjects. And there's areas that I found really fascinating, but there weren't things I would devote myself to. I think when we get to the subject of STEM versus arts, and why we see like more significant proportion of Muslims or Asians and Arabs mostly in one side than the other, I think a lot of it boils down to like people not actually pursuing what they're interested in, pursuing what they think is the most practical or the most sensible, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, we can elaborate on that as we go on, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I actually I like what you mentioned about like physics and science in general, because I find the same thing, and I always cringe when I see kind of you see on like Instagram and on Facebook all these pages like I love science and stuff like that, and I just find it so cringy because like the reality is you love the result of science, like you like what it gives you, or like what you're, the cool things you hear about it, but you don't actually studying it is difficult, but also actually like being a scientist is extremely difficult. It's not an easy job at all, and it's one that, yeah, I think there's definitely that disconnect there, especially when you're younger in school. And even when you're in university, I think it's like it's not until you're in actually studying something you realize, I like what I'm studying, but I don't know if I actually want to do this for a living, and that kind of thing. I think that's a difficult thing to really figure out. But yeah. And how's your master's been going, by the way? How's because that's quite a different experience for you as well, because like you're in a different university now as well.
Alhamdulillah, it's going quite well. Yeah, I'm both in a different university in a different field. So for context, yeah, again, my undergrad was in English literature, and I suppose that is like kind of within the meat and potatoes of the artsy degrees. It feels like the stereotype that you think of when you think of an arts of like the liberal arts. My master's, I describe that as something that kind of bridges the arts and humanities. Like it touches on aspects of social sciences and other areas that it's not. I suppose like the most generic way of saying it. It's not about sitting in a seminar and talking about your feelings. It has more to do with observations, and I don't say that to dismiss English, but I feel like that's the best way to kind of get that idea across.
Yeah. And how have you found the environment at SOAS? I mean, I suppose it's been hard probably to experience it just because of COVID and having to mostly do things remotely. But in terms of like your peers and in general, the culture and like your classes and stuff, what's been the experience like for you so far?
Incredibly interesting. I think one of the benefits of this is because we've all like with a post grad, the majority of the people you meet won't be from the same background as you. They will have like come from a similar-ish area, or they would have been working for within a certain field for a long time. So you have a much more mixed bag. Whereas the general body of students in your undergrad are going to be people who in the same boat as you for the most part. You do get like some outliers, people who are older returning to uni, but generally speaking, everyone's just come out of their A levels. This is their first sort of like experience of higher or further education, whereas I think we've gone through we're past that when you get to the master's stage, and it's changed my view of like studying the arts quite a bit now, where I think, and how do I put it, I suppose one thing I appreciate about this is that it's not so compartmentalized. One of my biggest issues with this whole like need to compartmentalize everything, this is STEM, this is the arts, this is humanities, is that a lot of the time it doesn't work because you'll rarely come across a field where you don't need to know something about something unrelated to it, or that something that isn't directly related to it. Like you need a number of different practices. There's nothing that's purely one subject on its own. It needs contextual knowledge from other areas, and you get to experience that a lot more in your postgrad than you do in your undergrad, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can often be the benefit of doing a master's and a kind of further study as well. It kind of gives you a chance to explore different things and maybe go into different, like slightly different subject matter as well, based on like compared to like what you studied at undergrad. For me, it was different again because I did a master's, but my master's again was in chemical engineering, so bit of a different experience there. Not as I suppose culturally rich, but what can you do? So like one thing I wonder is if categorizing like all these fields as either arts or humanities or STEM, it doesn't really apply. Is there like a better way to go forward? Is there maybe even a structural issue with like how we look at further education? Because I think there's definitely challenges there, not only for the institutions, but like if for students as well, and not only in figuring out what it is I want to study, but what actually I want to do after I finish studying. Because I remember, for me, it felt pretty easy to decide I want to do at least some type of engineering. I knew most likely I had certain interests like for in different fields. Um, I had a brief interest in pursuing law potentially, but I knew after that phase, I knew most likely I would either do some kind of science, medicine, or engineering.
Can
But
we begin by defining, I guess, what we mean by the arts? Because
yeah,
we've set up a binary, right? But it's kind of like, where does that line go? Is the arts at the moment where I think we've got it? Sciences and the humanities is on the art side, right? And everything else. Perhaps because then again, you have like the humanities, which generally, as a generally non-humanities person, forgive me, it seems that there's a vocation at the end of most of those things, right? That they have a sort of purpose, ish. I mean, okay, fine. Let's have an example, right? History, no vocation necessarily directly, but your intention is generally academia, etc. Right? You have sociology, academia, etc., etc. When you want to go to the straight definition of art in the most purest sense, you have something like art, in which to define a practical purpose, people will laugh. But in my view, it is, the most significant thing that we can do as humans, right? Objectively. And I go further. I think the Muslim world is lacking and lagging today, if not primarily, largely due to the fact that we have no power or no voice through this medium. But there's no kind of academic, not even an academic purpose to it. So where do we draw that line? Because again, it's about labels, isn't it? And I guess, it's like a meta question because it's questioning the question itself. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I suppose that's one of the issues in itself. Is I think a lot of people don't really look at academia as often as like a route, unless like you come from a family where perhaps academia, you're either your parents or someone in another one of your relatives has gone down that route. Because like I know for me when I was in school, academia was never something that was kind of even suggested as an option. Even though you can go into that route in pretty much any field of study, which is including engineering as well. But yeah, perhaps like that should be one way to look at it. If you want to study something like arts, that should be more typically looked at as one of the career routes ahead of you. Because I think there still is that disconnect of like, this is what I'm going to study. Okay, but once I study this, what am I actually going to do with it, or what am I going to make of myself once I have this degree? So there's a few challenges there, and I think people, I don't know, I think like people also get too focused on the traditional careers as well, because there's lots of things that you can do, even if you don't have like what's a very, I suppose, desirable or in demand degree like engineering or science. You know, like and like you're saying, Abdullah, I agree that one of the issues I think in the Muslim world, when we look at our own countries, is there is kind of a lack of focus in these areas, and it does hurt the society as a whole when you have that. You can't just have everyone be a doctor or everyone be a mathematician. You do need people who are philosophical thinkers as well as people who are experts in history or in kind of culture, things like that. As
Another
well as like
question,
literature.
perhaps we can broaden even more. Why not? Because we've only got an hour, right? When we say the arts or these subjects, do we mean only through university? So, do you when we say we need people to go into history, we need people to go into da 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 da, and some things which are less academic in the formal sense, like art, I think probably you'd rather not do an arts degree if you want to get into art. For example, art as in like fine art. So is our discussion today only about academic, like should Muslims get into the academic arts or should Muslims get into the arts? Does that make sense? Please tell me that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I get the question in the sense of like,
are we talking about academic roots?
Traditional older styles of like hands-on things? Of course,
in a way.
One example that came to me was I was watching this video the other day of this traditional Korean pot maker. And he's like, yeah, we have an unbroken line of tradition from the old masters of like ancient Korean pot making. So like the example, a corollary to your point would be like, would we get people involved in things like reviving the old Islamic gate, art and architectural styles, woodworking and masonry and that kind of stuff? Like, that's what you meant, Abdullah?
In a way, I don't know, Ibrahim.
Or less high-minded?
I don't think I was very clear. Actually,
I think the bigger issue we're kind of avoiding, what we've thus far avoided, is like, what we're talking about, like traditional roots. They're not that old. They're not as traditional as we think. What is a traditional form of work? Most of what we're talking about has only really emerged in like the past 200-300 years max.
Yeah.
And speaking of like how we categorize things, going back to the topic of right, what is STEM, what are the arts? This whole thing of compartmentalization, for the most part, is also a very recent phenomenon, as far as I'm aware. Dr. Ghilan talks about this actually in a number of articles and a number of his podcasts as well. That this era of specialization, it really emerged from an industrial mindset of, in like the sort of, in the assembly line, every person only has one job. They need to master that one job, and they don't need to be concerned about anything else. That mindset, like, trickles down. Yeah, exactly. You had one job, do it right, right? And you see it and it's not just in working life; it's how we teach as well. Like, traditionally speaking, if we look at many of our scholars in the past, they did a bit of everything. They didn't stick to one thing. They'd most likely flourish in one area or be most known for one area. Not just in the Islamic world, but in the Western world as well. Like, we remember Da Vinci, the painter. Da Vinci did a number of other things. He was an inventor. Yeah, he was a thinker. He was a mathematician. He did a number of different things.
Yeah, the category of the Renaissance man. Renaissance man. Sorry.
Exactly. That's the point. You have Renaissance men. You have polymaths, and nowadays we kind of look down on that. We think of it as the jack of all trades, master of none, as if that's something bad. But it's not necessarily. And that's what I mean. Like, this idea of like compartmentalizing knowledge, I don't think we can push it as far as we think we can, because you'll inevitably need another area of knowledge to support or complement what you specialize in.
Especially as the times change, right?
So. Yeah. Exactly. So when we talk about going down traditional routes, how traditional really are they? When it comes to I get what Abeer means by this, by the way. When he says, like, going down this template, because you've got somewhat of a like clear career path. Whereas if you're going down the arts routes, you don't really. And when people try to project a sort of a career path onto it, it's a bit problematic. I mean, I can't begin to count the number of times where I've introduced myself to someone, they asked me what I do, and I told them I study English, and they said, and they reply with, "Oh, so you want to be a teacher?" Why is that the only natural step you can think of?
Ibrahim, I'm so glad that you brought this up. I'm going to attempt to be really pompous here. There's a lot of random things going on in my head. I'm going to try and string them together at the risk of sounding like an absolute waste man. Okay. Where do we start? Ibrahim raises the idea of oh my god, this is getting really big. Ibrahim raises the idea of like a traditional way of learning. No, sorry, Mari, you raised the idea of craft, right? And the idea that, which, some argue is not an art initially, because it's rote memorization, really. You're learning how to do the same thing, like calligraphy, for example, or even Turkish archery, right? I read I think it was on Twitter, actually. I mean, the first stage is just pulling back my sister's an archer, not me, but you pull it back 300 times and that's the first stage, etc. And then you're not producing. That's the key thing. Like, you're learning, you're not producing anything. You're just becoming a robot or a vehicle or a vessel for this new information. And then the idea is that you get an ijaza, right? And then the calligrapher is allowed to write an ayah from the Quran that isn't copied from someone else. They're allowed to make new flourishes, etc. But there's this period where you are a craftsman. You're not technically an artist, because an artist, I think the function of an artist is to reflect the time and then produce things that reflect that and mirror the time. Now, a vocation is a way of trying to still time, because you're creating a function for today's world, like something that needs to be done, right? And that's why it's easy to understand. It's easy to say, I want to be a doctor because today we need doctors. However, when day after tomorrow we have robot doctors, that becomes a obsolete vocation. And then you have someone who is an artist who produces new functions for society. Now, not artist in the painting sense or etc., but just by definition, we have a model of someone who produces things, because they've done the craft and now they have the ability to produce things that do not exist. And so when you ask an artist, what is the purpose of your job? Well, obviously you can't understand, because they are producing something that doesn't exist. So they can't tell you that, does that make sense? Like their job doesn't exist because their job is to produce things that you can't see, right? It's creative with a capital C. I lots of stringy thoughts.
I get that, but I mean, in that sense, there's a lot that becomes creative because education then becomes
definitely. Exactly, but
that's something they're always on about. Like you teaching students, you're teaching like the people of tomorrow and training kids for jobs that don't exist now.
Would you say that's? I mean, if we broaden the definition, would you say that's not artistic or fine, creative?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is an artistic, creative element to like education or something, in that you have to find different ways of approaching the material and bringing it to the students and to get them to understand things, and giving them the skills behind it. Because ultimately, I muted myself. Ultimately, a lot of education is less about material and more about skills. So like one of the key takeaways of like history is less so knowing that in like 410 city of Rome was sacked, as opposed to being able to critically analyze a written text and to like sift through information or like work through biased material and things like this. And that these are the deeper, more creative skills that will last with you through a lifetime, really.
And which render you a member of the arts, right?
Perhaps, or at least they give you the capacity to do that, because then you can take your whatever skills.
And that's why, Ibrahim, we had this debate. That's why maths is an art, because you're producing new formulas. No, honestly, I'm being serious.
No,
As opposed to
higher levels, everything's an art, though.
I think
if you're going to take top tier physics,
is there a problem with that?
I don't think there's a problem with that. And also, I think it shows,
I probably agree with that model, really.
Yeah, it shows as well the need for creativity in any field or any space. Like even if you look at right now, we're in very much like a tech, like innovative kind of tech scene right now, right? We have been for some time because of how much computers have advanced and because of how much disruption is possible through like our increased kind of computing power, right? When you look at things like Uber and Tesla and all these social media sites and so on, which have kind of changed the fabric of our society in many ways. And none of that stuff is possible if you are someone who can't think in any way differently. In my opinion, you have to be able to look at something and see this could be done better or this could be done differently. Otherwise, like, how do you go from horses and carriages to the car? How do you go from the car to the autonomous car, which is where we're heading now? How do you go from fossil fuels to renewable energy? So like like when Abdullah says maths is an art or everything is an art, I think that actually makes sense. Like you do have while it may not be an art in the very traditional sense or as to how we understand what that word means, I think
in today's sense, I guess.
Yeah, I think really the reality is in many ways it is, and you do need to like within those spaces there has to be people who can think differently, and that's how things progress.
I'd like to re-qualify what Abdullah said. Actually, I don't necessarily think everything's an art, but everything demands a level of artistry.
Which is interesting because
or
when someone reaches the top of their thing, what do you say? You say doing this well is an art because it's the top level of doing something, right? Anyway, go on, sorry.
As an example of that, again, like within the STEM fields, whenever a scientist is making some kind of observation, let's say someone is studying the behavior of subatomic particles, I think it's fair to assume that that person could not care less whether or not their observation has a practical use to it. Meaning, they don't care about what the technological applications of that observation are, or what the wider implications that observation will have for the human race will be, but they care about the observation itself. So if there's a leap between making the observation and making that observation something we can use or benefit from, which in a materialist sense.
Very good point.
So yeah, I think that leap demands creativity.
But I think that's the opposite of art.
Really?
Yeah,
Sorry, I don't want to push the boundaries.
I've spoken too much. I'm not going to try and justify myself again. You guys just think Abdullah's talking nonsense and ignore me, inshallah. I'm going to eat the same.
No. I mean, it's an
Sorry,
interesting thought.
See that? I'll mute myself.
See that technique there? That's artistry right there. You're guilting us into agreeing with you. Not saying that I disagree with you. I'm just saying that there was like so you could requalify what was being said there.
Yeah, I think it's I think like there's a very human thing as well about wanting to see things that are kind of different. Like for example, if we just take football, just like a sport, it's the feeling you get just watching, say, an average player play versus someone like Messi or Ronaldo play, or Neymar, the way they move with the ball, the things that they can do, which it's like Abdul was saying, you end up describing, oh, this is like artistry at its finest, because it's something that's so unique and different. And I've seen this kind of thinking applied in other areas as well, like if we take architecture as an example, it's you don't have to be an architect to know that if a building is just a drab gray block, no one wants to go anywhere near it, no one wants to look at it, it's horrible. You probably will just feel worse just looking at it, right? Whereas when buildings are built in a unique way, take advantage of space and light and kind of look appealing and visually appealing, it kind of brightens everything up around it as well. So there is like it's I think it's a human thing as well to kind of want to kind of see things that are just different. And even when you're a child, it's like that. To a child, you kind of because your imagination is so potent, you're able to just kind of find fun and different things just with things that as an adult you look at it and just think, this is just a bottle. But as a child, that bottle becomes a sword. Maybe it becomes like a grenade that you're going to throw or something, whatever. Because sometimes it becomes a football itself. If you're bored, you don't have an actual ball, stuff like that. So
I'm so sorry to try and justify my loopy idea again, but so we had this idea that apricot seed. We had this idea that I had this idea. You guys weren't really agreeing with me, but you learn a craft and you become a craftsman, and then you have the ability to become an artist. In any case, you have perhaps Abeer the engineer, who is a craftsman of engineering, right? And perhaps tomorrow Abeer's got some sort of strange chemical reaction going on in his house, and he knows exactly what to do, and then he becomes an artist because he's producing solutions to new things. Fine. So, and craft. I just thought when Abeer mentioned about architecture, the past 200 years of architecture, we have movements, right? Again, we're labeling, but you start with the Baroque, 300, 400 years, fine, which is like a really exaggerated, elaborate form of art, which leaves limitations. It's kind of the most decadent thing you can do, because architects just don't care about reality anymore. They just design what they want. So a door doesn't look like a door, a window doesn't look like a window. They just think, let's just be crazy artists, right? Nothing relates to anything. And then in reaction, we work in cycles. Humans are cyclical beings. Life is a cycle. So in reaction, people who don't like that start becoming more primitive. So we get the Greek revival, which is about science and about purity. And the Greek temple is supposed to be kind of the most primitive form of construction, because it's supposed to literally be the primitive heart. I mean, you can look it up. It's like columns are trees, like trunks, etc. Anyway, And then after that, so you're kind of getting more and more extreme. And then after that, you have perhaps, I'm not trying to impose this, but then you have the arts and crafts movement, right? Which is kind of craftsmanship. And then you have the modernism movement, which is kind of anti-art and it literally anti-ornamentation, etc. So it's kind of that cycle in reverse. So maybe I'm supporting, that's a good piece of evidence. It's kind of the backwards way of me describing it, which perhaps supports the fact that that's how it works. Maybe. I'm talking nonsense of halal, but I don't know if I'm making sense. I hope I am. You know, these things, you can't really tell whether you're being coherent, especially when it's virtual.
Anyway. I feel like you've had a lot of caffeine today, Abdullah.
What was the subject we were supposed to talk about? Like, why not enough Muslims do arts, or like why I get cussed out for doing
something like that? Yeah,
we've gone down some rabbit holes. All right.
Yeah,
and
guys, it's fine. I know it's my fault.
I think this is interesting though. Like, I think so. Like, if we just go back to the root question, right? Like, let's say the root question is, okay, how do we encourage more Muslims to get into the arts? Well, I think it makes sense to kind of talk a bit about, okay, what do we even mean by the arts, as well as looking at not only what they would be studying, but what kind of what life does that lead to after you're finishing university and these kind of things as well. And I think now there's actually some good avenues and kind of, I suppose, more inspirations for Muslims to go into these fields as well than perhaps there were in the past. So, like, for example, if you want to be a director, for a long time there probably wouldn't have been much, especially if you live in the West or watch a lot of Western media. I doubt you would have had much inspiration to do so, especially given the lack of representation, not only of Muslims in that area, typically, when we look at like Hollywood and stuff, but even just general lack of representation for other ethnicities and so on as well. Whereas now that there are increases to that, and also specifically for Muslims, we have things like Earth the Grill and other series like that, which have kind of helped show that there is not only room and like an appetite for this kind of historical content that focuses on kind of Muslims and to a degree Islam, but these are actually made by Muslims as well. So this is something that you can actually pursue and start doing. Whereas because it's so easy to be dissuaded, I think, from these things, especially when you're when you're a teen. And sometimes it's your own parents and so on who do so, and not because they wish you to not be happy, but they know, unfortunately, that anything that isn't kind of guaranteed stability is scary, and something that isn't engineering, law, maths, medicine typically is a little bit, I suppose, less likely to be a guaranteed job for you. But it's good that we have that inspiration. I'll even say for like you guys, you're in that position too, because you're actually studying these fields. You can kind of vouch for them and talk about why you went into them, what you're working towards now. And I would argue as well, me myself, I benefit greatly just from like speaking with you, like whether it's learning specifically about your fields, but in general, your perspectives on certain things can be so different. Particularly Abdullah, I think you're a great example for that, because mashallah, you have such a creative way of thinking that often I struggle to even keep up with a lot of your ideas.
I think that's a fault, Aki. It's not him to praise.
I mean, to answer the question of how do we encourage more Muslims to take a certain route, I think fundamentally speaking, I'm not all that concerned with like convincing more Muslims to do an arts degree or study one thing over another. I think the main thing we need to emphasize is having ambition in whatever you do and not settling for less. I'm really irked by the fact that we have so many Muslims in STEM who aren't leaders in their fields, who are completely content being like, I don't know, like being someone else's labor. And I'm not saying that to denigrate anyone or to belittle what people do. People do some fantastic work in all these fields, but again, it's become cliche because I've heard this example quite a bit. But how many Muslim CEOs do we see, like practicing Muslim CEOs? How many Muslims do we see getting involved in bioethics instead of just going down the med school route? Like how many people do we see like actually like pioneering in whatever they do? And I feel like we put too much like we give too much credit to university as like this like the sort of guaranteed pathway, especially within the arts. It's from what I've seen, like if you want to be an artist per se, I don't think university is going to give you something that unique that you wouldn't otherwise get. Maybe a networking opportunity and some again academic rigor. That's if you want to be a creative in a certain field, not a critic. For instance, a number of film directors in the West anyway, you'll have film directors who thrived after going through film school, and you'll have like these sort of guerrilla artists who make a name for themselves another way. I mean, I think there's a director, Robert Rodriguez. He did like the Machete films and a lot of like this sort of Grindhouse. Well, he did Grindhouse as well. He's a friend of Tarantino. He wrote a book, I think it's called Rebel Without a Crew, about how he basically financed not only financed his first film, but shot it entirely on his own and built his career off that. You have directors like Scorsese, even Tarantino, and a number of others who didn't go to film school, who did everything off their own backs. Obviously, it's a lot harder. Like getting into film school isn't that easy either. So I don't think I feel like we put too much emphasis on like academia because we're still in an age where we think that the little bit of paper that might as well like that you do need for your CV, depending for most jobs at the very least. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have mastered that discipline, or like for me personally, I don't think I spent enough time writing when I was doing my undergrad. I want to be a writer down the line, and I think that's something I'm getting better at now than I did throughout my whole undergrad. Even when I did like creative writing modules, I didn't spend that much time writing, and that's a kind of experience that I felt that my degree wasn't going to guarantee me. Something you have to do on your own back. I mean, there's that. Have you guys seen the film Good Will Hunting?
Yeah.
There's a bit in it where where the guy has like an argument with someone in a pub, and he completely like demolishes him. I don't know if he was like some preppy political science student, and he just like points out like the guy's like just ripping off Adam Smith and stuff like that. And he said that like at the end of this, like you're gonna have you're gonna be 50K in debt for an education you could have got at the public library. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's true for a lot of degrees. I'd go as far as to say even within STEM. Like there's a lot of STEM subjects who really, if you wanted to get like the theory like on lock, you could really do that off your own back if you had the discipline and the sort of determination to do it. Mm. So the degree isn't providing you with something that much else other than, again, a networking opportunity and a bit of evidence to show that you studied something.
In that line, maybe it's actually harming you and limiting you. And I'm interested, Mari and Ibrahim, whether this is the case for your field as well. But in architecture and certainly arts schools, every university has a style or a flavor or a way in which things are done. And this is something that, my friends and I have ranted about as well. But at my architecture school, we have a very specific set of things that are appreciated and things that are kind of discouraged, which is not bad, because to say that you have a school or a human system in which there aren't human preferences that are shown it's unacceptable, because what kind of sterile environment do you expect, right? But you're being put into an orthodoxy, right? You're being forced through another way, a person's way of seeing the world, as opposed to, and here's the thing, right? On a societal level, perhaps that's beneficial, but like the film example, people who go through a certain film school inevitably end up filming in certain ways. People who go through certain architecture schools, in Bath, it's a very specific stereotype, design buildings in certain ways. And there's an expectation. I mean, we have, even in the UK, we have, I mean, I could list every single architecture school, or at least, the well-known ones, and I could tell you what their stereotype is, and what kind of stuff there is expected from them. But it's quite a popular meme, if you will, right? On societal levels at work, especially for traditions, especially for traditional things. So calligraphy, okay, I'm not going to say my opinion, actually, because I'm not qualified to have an opinion. but you have a very specific and rigid way in which you have to learn calligraphy in a serious sense. You go to these days Turkey. You sit you sit with a sheikh, often from a Sufi tariqah, and you just learn the same letter for years, etc. And it goes like that. And so you have a very distinct style, which is a chain. I think, Maru, you mentioned the pottery, right? You are learning someone else's craft, and then you have the ability to innovate in that craft. Maybe it's the same for science and history. But see, on a traditional level, it works and it makes sense. But I guess the risk of the opposite, the benefit of the opposite, first of all, is that you have lots of truly innovative things happening, right? As opposed to just slight changes and variations of the same formula. You have true innovation, but what that means is you have 99 things that are rubbish, because that's how innovation works. And one thing which is truly that's going to stand the test of time, and sometimes a bad thing stand the test of time. And then you also have the risk of a postmodern kind of output where there's so much going on and so much randomness that it just becomes a bit too artistic. I mean, we need a balance, right? I mean, I'm a fan of these things, but there's a societal benefit and harm in these things as well, and there's a middle road. I don't know, is that the same in your degree? Abeer, even yours, is there an orthodox way to do engineering?
Yeah, I suppose yeah. So within engineering, there's going to be certain things that are kind of tried and true, right? Certain methodology, and that would apply regardless of what type of engineering you studied as well. There'll be certain things that kind of this is the way you go about it, and particularly with chemical engineering as I studied it. We had to learn. You learn very much in a practical sense how you would go about things. You also learn in a sense based on like the typical law and legislation, because that does apply into it with engineering as well. Like there's certain rules, especially if you want to build like a new plant, for example, manufacturing facility, stuff like that. So you learn to think in that way. You don't. There's not. I suppose there's not as much direct emphasis in those things to change it up. Which in many ways it makes sense. Like that you're going to have these are certain laws, and assumptions based off our understanding of the current, not only physical world but also chemical world, things like that, and how chemical reactions work and so on. That you follow. Aside from that, there is room for kind of I suppose optimizations, improvements, iterations. A lot of chemical, a lot of what I studied, is kind of funny in a way because there's so much trial and error involved in it. Whenever if you're designing a reactor or something, it's not okay, you have your base template of how a typical reactor will be, but then you iterate, make slight changes to things. Maybe you change the exact dimensions of it. Maybe you change some materials used. So I suppose there's an overall foundation that bases your thinking and bases your methodology. Within that, though, there's still some work for you to do. Though I don't know if that's strictly creative, but because it is again still somewhat fairly standardized. But
It's craft, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say part of it. Yeah, it is a craft because you're applying your own understanding. You're applying the understanding of how far as a society we've progressed in terms of these things as well. But
and then every few hundred years you have the Mujaddid, right? The artist. You have the Einstein.
Yeah.
I mean, no, seriously. I mean, Einstein, a complete paradigm shifter. He goes into a rigid, what we see as STEM field, and he does a purely artistic thing. And you have a completely new way of seeing physics. Interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes you have stuff even and one of the things I love about engineering is it's inherently, in my opinion, it is a profession that requires creativity because it's all about problem solving. Problem solving is figuring out not only what the problem is, but okay, how do I actually, how do I solve it? And that can often require you to think things differently. And even some of the lectures I had and stuff, they've gone on to create their own businesses and things off of areas of research that they're experts in and creating products or solutions to things based off their expertise and their craft. Which I personally always find that inspirational. I find that really interesting. I love that idea of just being able to create something that helps make the world better. Whether it's our energy needs or even things like wastewater treatment, recycling, all these things. there's a huge requirement for that.
What you said actually reminded me a little bit of a quote from another film. Just on like a film quote madness today, but from the Wind Rises. I did an essay on it recently actually for uni. There was something along the lines of inspiration unlocks the future, technology eventually catches up. I feel like engineering does have that sort of creativity to it that we often overlook. Returning to what Abdullah was saying about creating orthodoxies within like institutions, that's something I've observed as well. And you do have these sort of academic movements that like try to rage against this. You have the modernist turn, the postmodernist turn. You have post everything pretty much. That's trying to rebel against something else, but in doing that, you're setting a sort of new standard for everything. And in as much as people like say that we encourage diversity, we encourage debate and whatnot, in reality, like university itself, whether like I'm not saying that academics themselves are guilty of this, but I'm saying the environment of university and the nature of a degree is such that students are discouraged from challenging the ideas of their teachers. Sometimes that's a good thing. I think a lot of the time in secular academia anyway, I think it can like stifle creativity. I saw it in my undergrad. I'd see it less so now, but a lot of people I knew at uni before. I'm not saying this to again insult or belittle anyone, but I felt like a lot of people were very uncritical of what they were being taught.
This is undergrad, right?
And I'm not saying that like I was this sort of like Rain Man type guy that like I was outside the box, whatever. But at the very least, I tried to diversify what I did in my degree. Like whenever we had a set of either if we had, for whatever assignment, if we had a set list of questions or if we had free reign, I tried to do my best to make sure that whatever topic I chose, I wanted to make sure someone else wasn't doing that, and I wanted to make sure I got a chance at the very least put forward a critique of whatever of what we were being taught.
This is undergrad, right?
And yeah. In my undergrad, I did it more so in my postgrad. I feel like that the environment here is a bit more open to that. But I felt a lot of the time that like there was certain like you couldn't have a bad opinion of Roland Barthes and the death of the author. Yeah. You couldn't assume that you couldn't. God forbid that you assume that a form of literary criticism that's kind of been dismissed might have some validity to it. People would think that's archaic and backward or whatnot, but there might be something there that other people miss. I'm not saying that academics are like deliberately trying to force feed their own research down your throats. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying the environment is such that again, people don't want to risk their grades on an idea that hasn't been touched on a lot. That they might not find a breadth of literature about already. And I think the university environment can, in that respect, stifle creativity in the realm of criticism.
I guess this raises the question: is undergrad slowly becoming not further education?
I mean, to answer a number of questions, first off, I'd also challenge Ibrahim's assertion that a degree is not necessarily like a further degree or like a higher education or like postgraduate studies or graduate studies, whatever it is, are like that you can achieve the same ends without a teacher. And that I would say is the linchpin of a university education, the teacher. Because if you're going to go to the library, you might drown in a lot of the primary sources without a guide. But I'd say the education itself is in a moment
very traditional right now in the Islamic sense. Alhamdulillah.
Well, I mean, because I've read these things. I've tried to read.
He said, "Was it in a library you'll drown?"
Yeah, you could drown in the sources. No, because I mean, in my high school years, I tried to read some of the classical like books. So I tried reading Machiavelli's Prince and Crime and Punishment and a whole bunch of other stuff because I found they were interesting, but I didn't understand anything that I was doing. And I had, alhamdulillah, the ability to return to some of these things in my college degree. But this time I had a teacher guiding me through like guided readings of these things, explaining things I wouldn't have understood if I was just reading the book on my own. and that there's an element that's lost without the teacher. The rest of the university setting, yeah, can be rather stifling. Universities can stifle creativity, especially when you get into like the hegemony of an idea. And universities in history absolutely do have orthodoxies. You get into different historical frameworks: Marxist history, feminist history, great person theory of history, social histories. And when you get into like the nitty gritty of understanding and analyzing events and the like how and why events occurred, there can be a lot of debate over things, and divergent opinions can be shut down. Like the intellectual regime will emphasize or de-emphasize specific things. So like religion and the effects of religious movements in history is kind of like de-emphasized. It just plays a kind of unifying factor. And then that's about it. No one will really get into like deeper critiques of like, or not critiques, but like deeper analyses of like the effect of Islam in pre-Arabian society or things like that. It's just something that's like, yeah, we recognize they have a religion, it's unified them, blah, blah, blah. We put it on the side because that's for the religious studies people to discuss. Historians, we don't really get into that. And like there's divisions and whatnot.
There was a biography of Saladin that I read. It's a really popular one, Marie. I'm sure you've seen it. It's the John Mann one.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, bro, I mean, this guy writes Saladin as if he's just an atheist with religion as a label, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like he talks about these major decisions he makes, and it's kind of like religion didn't even play a part in his life. Like, so subhanAllah, it's just completely written out. But
yeah,
it's interesting how we just project our own kind of, anyway.
Yeah, ultimately. And that's the thing with history. We project our own ideas onto the past. History and the study of history is as much a reflection on us as it is on the past. But I'd say the education itself, undergrad, like secondary school, higher education through postgraduate, is all in a moment of transition and transformation. Because, like you guys had mentioned this before, that degrees are crucial to the health of a CV. Therefore, we're churning out graduates with a kind of rubber stamp. Okay, here you understand material, you understand material, you understand material, conveyor belt kind of thing, as opposed to creating an environment of healthy academic debate and like where we're kind of debating new ideas. Also, I'd say the dynamic between teacher and student and like the inherent power imbalance there may influence the ability to articulate ideas, but it's something that bleeds away at the higher levels. So in a master's degree, there's a lot more emphasis, at least in my experience, on critique and analysis, and it's expected. Whereas in undergraduate, a very basic understanding is what's expected of you. But where was I going? Oh yeah,
I think the issue. I agree with what you're saying. That again, like we can't like disregard tutelage, and I'm not saying that like I've got a tremendous amount of respect for most of my teachers, but
most of my teachers.
I think the issue is that, wow, you really read
there's
into
always
it.
the handful of teachers where you're like, you have not contributed much to this class. I would be better off without you.
Well, an issue I find it might be different at different universities, but if you're outside of the Oxbridge sort of category, you will not have that. You will not have a particularly deep relationship with your teacher.
Yeah, true.
Most of your tutors, you'll see them once or twice a week, and in between then you might drop them an email about something you missed or some recommended reading. But all in all, you don't have that much of a proximity with them. That's something I found was different in my postgrad than my undergrad. Like now, my course convener and a number of my tutors, I feel like I'm actually. It's ironic, really, because I'm not that close physically with them, but I feel like I have a more in-depth relationship with them than I did with a lot of my undergrad teachers. Where again, if you wanted to take them as like a mentor, it was not within that was outside the scope of what the degree offered. And again, unless you're in somewhere like Oxford or Cambridge, where like every seminar group will be a lot smaller, I don't think you'll have that. So I do agree that again, you can only progress so far on your own.
Yeah.
But how can you have? But you
The
can't
environment
just say
needs to
you have a
facilitate
teacher.
that
You have some.
relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to round things off here, because we've touched on so many different things, and really, I think that shows how nuanced this topic is. It's not a simple matter, and I would argue like we could probably talk all day about the structure just of university and education itself, especially in the modern day, because like the structure we have here in the UK, for example, it's pretty much the same as the US, pretty much the same in Europe, but also even in the East, it's pretty much becomes the standard template. Um, but I think the main takeaways kind of that I'm getting, and for someone who might be listening who has an interest in something that is either arts or humanities or something else, I suppose something not typical. It's healthy to pursue those things basically, and you know, learn about it. Like for me, what helped me as well whenever I was trying to explore what to do at university and what I in general I want to do in life is just research. Like look up what other people are doing. Look into like their different kind of options, what might sound interesting to you, what you could see yourself doing, stuff like that. Um, but also, do try and be practical. Like I don't like none of us are saying, um, take every risk you can. It's good to have a practical approach in life, and that is needed too. Um, inshallah. But yeah, like I really enjoyed this discussion with you guys, and I think personally, even discussions like this, I don't think would be possible if every single one of us studied the exact same thing at the exact same university. Like there's a beauty in kind of our diversity in that sense in terms of our backgrounds, our ways of even looking at things and thinking, which alhamdulillah is kind of the nice thing of our ummah as well. And the diverse ummah is a powerful ummah. And one of the examples I think of as well is when we look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was establishing the Masjid al Nabi, in Medina after making the hijrah to Medina from Makkah with his companions to spread the deen in Medina. You know, to build a masjid, he didn't say, okay, every single one of you lay bricks. You had your people laying bricks, you had your people mixing the cement, you had people who knew kind of maybe how to get the foundations and so on. Basically, you had people, divided in the sense of what they do best and what they're best suited for. It wasn't a case of everyone do the exact same thing, and it wasn't a case of what one person is doing is valued more than the other. Is simply looking at what people's talents, where their talents are, which is an important part of kind of, I think, uh, our lives now, as well as not as well as seeing what interests us, but also not like looking at what we do as valued, even if it's something that's not as reputable. Typically, like especially in Pakistan, for example, medicine is still very much seen as like creme de la creme in terms of family reputation and stuff like that, and seeing value in regardless what you study. So it's up there, guys. This was a nice convo. Appreciate you all coming on, sharing kind of your own thoughts and experiences on it. And hopefully we'll start seeing some more Muslim creatives and like Ibrahim said, people amongst ourselves kind of, pushing the boundary in whatever they study or whatever they work. Because I definitely think we all want to see that, inshallah. We want to see Muslims at the top doing great things, inshallah. Cool. So Jazakallah khair to everyone listening. I hope you are watching. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and stay tuned for the next one, inshallah. From all of us at Finding Islam, take care and we'll catch you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.